See what I've created here. Turns out today's lesson will be coming to you from the moon. And I am I'm Max Harper here with Simmetri. I taught day 2, and I will be teaching this one, day 4. I'm going to move some of these objects around here, and we're going to see what it is we're building today. This is a little world that I built to show us how to kind of test and build like a filter or kind of a conditional test. If it's red and it comes through this red hoop, it's going to get bounced off. This is the red bouncer. And if it's green and it comes through the green hoop, it's going to get bounced off the green hoop. This reminds me of like the double slit experiment or something like that, with like testing laser wavelengths or something and bouncing stuff. So it's kind of cool. Oh, there's a light bit of gravity up here on the moon, and you can see that the green emanates from this. The spheres emanate each color from their respective cylinder over here, which I can also move around. And these are each one of these is fixed, and fixed meaning that its rigid body is not movable. So it's rigid, but it's not getting acted on by gravity. So that's the same for our hoops here. And so I can move these around and aim them in a lot of different ways. And the emitter that's emitting this sphere it puts a certain amount into the world, and then it starts getting rid of the old ones, so it doesn't put an infinite amount in space. So that's why you see them fading out at about 20 each. We can change that. That's called the max simultaneous. And my name being Max, that's my handle on Steam and in Discord, Max Simultaneous. And you can imagine that this just simple situation here, this simple conditional test and this bouncing, is kind of a cool potential start for a game. The same properties that we're going to learn today just on an if statement, those very same properties, of testing some object, testing some property of an object, like its name, like its color, like how much mass it has. That same thing is going to be useful in telling stories or building interactive art pieces or anything like that, building basic menus and whatnot. The last thing that we'll get to is this one, which is similar to these 3. This yellow one is kind of combining. It has an effect on all these things that is different from any of the other ones. It might not be very visible here yet, but we'll test this later. And the idea is that this thing will have an effect. Oh yeah, and sorry, and the last little bit here is show you. Right now it's basically doing nothing. Let's aim them all into it, and then what we're going to do is activate it using this green button. And so the same principle of testing, whether something's name is green or red, or if its color is red or green, that makes these things tell it which way to bounce. I can also use just as a simple ready, set, go button, which means that if I push the green button, all of a sudden this yellow guy will start doing what he does. But his effect is quite weak. So I'm going to have to demonstrate this to you in stop time. So anyway, let me re-demonstrate this one for you in stop time. So I'm going to exit VR mode and jump into the lesson. I'm pressing escape to go into pause time, and press escape one more time, and I am now in VR mode, which I'm going to take it out of VR mode for the time being. And you can see the keyboard callouts over here, let you know what I'm doing as I move around. Flying the camera, right mouse button, the pivot of the camera. This is kind of a pro tip. You see this little reticle right in the center. If I press Control, I'll pivot and rotate around that location. So that's my point of interest. So that's a right click and a control and a mouse move. super helpful. It's one of my favorites. And then I'm using ASDW and the right mouse button hold, and I'm continually holding the right mouse button until I get where I want to be, getting into position. Cool. I like to just sort of keep teaching you some of the stuff that you've learned up in here in the Intro to Basics, like looking and moving around the space. You can always get better at that. So I was teaching you about these yellow ones. So I need to actually get this to a better place to teach you. I'm going to bring it over here a little bit. Bring the light with it too. And then I'm going to, just for the time being, I'm just going to get rid of gravity entirely. So to get rid of gravity, also under the Learn menu, under Physics, Anti-Gravity. So right now we have low gravity, and I'm going to make it entirely 0. To do that, I click on the terrain. To get the terrain space properties. Excuse me, I keep redocking it. The terrain space properties, and I'm going to go to on the top level, come over to the right side, Physics, Gravity, and I could select Y and hit 0. Also, if you just double click this scroll wheel, oftentimes when you double click something, you're going to set it to its default or to 0. So that's a fast way to 0 something out. So I'm going to set it to 0, and that means that these balls are all going to float up here. And so this is a separate little test of conditional. The main condition here is this overall trigger, this yellow one, isn't going to do anything to these 4 balls when I first pass it, when my first pass goes through it, until it's been turned on. Consider this green an on button. So now that I've clicked it, something's going to happen, and it sends them in different ways, kind of sorting them by their type, whether they're blue or not. So again, I'm not ready. Oops, I bonked it. Actually, the rim bonked the blue one, I think. So not ready. Green button. We're on. Cool. So you get the idea that, you know, we're going to do some stuff that makes us help, you know, kind of sort things in real time, and then also something that just basically kind of changes the state of our world, or lets you know, that changes the state of this button. I'm on, I'm off, I'm on, I'm off, and that'll help us be able to kind of build a lot of different interactions really quickly, so that things can have different states and different behaviors. For each one of those states, on, off, maybe partially on, angular, whatever. Okay, so to set up this world, what I did was under our horizons, we have some preset kind of looks of the world using the horizon space, the sky space, and kind of changing some of the light properties and stuff, and you can do those really quickly. And then you can also 0 it out with reset to default. So if I click on the reset to default and I click in the space, I get back to that kind of default look. But I could go to horizons and I could do pyramids, and I get these pyramids in the way off distance. And I could also do summer dusk. Ooh, very cool. I'm out near the Great Pyramids, but I'm going to reset to default, and we're going to stay on the moon. Reset to default, and on the moon. Takes a little while to get to the moon, and here we are. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to set up this scene, which means that we need to build our apparatuses here, and then and get our triggers ready to bounce these kind of different objects through them. So we're going to start really simple. It's going to kind of look a little like yesterday's lesson, and build on yesterday and the day before. Actually, even the first day, primarily, it might look most like that. And so what I'm going to do is leave this here so we can kind of come back and reference it whenever we need. And I'm going to, I like having the moon in the background. Let's actually do this, let's put this behind us, and we will build right here. So if you came in and you said File New, all you'd do to make it look like this is hit Horizon on the moon, and now you're ready to go. What we're going to do is start off with a simple sphere and a simple trigger. You can draw a sphere, of any size. We're going to end up cloning it a couple of times. And we're going to make kind of 3 copies in different colors. But let's draw our trigger next. So we go to Trigger. We're going to use a plane trigger. And if you're able to draw it in a really straight line, like a thin line as opposed to a square like this, the next move you can make goes straight up. If you don't, I'll redo it. If you don't, you can rotate it into position. So again, Trigger, under Triggers, Plane. Let's say I just draw this. I can right-click to exit drawing, and then hit E to rotate. If I hold down Shift, it'll rotate 45 degrees, then 90. Then I can press W to get back to move, and move it up. And you'll notice that these arrows are pointing kind of away from my sphere. The arrows point to the enter direction. So this trigger can run one script when it gets entered and another different, or it can be the same script when it gets exited. If this ball goes through this thing this direction, that will be exit. And if it goes through this direction, that will be enter. So I'm going to actually just flip this 180 so that it's now when this ball goes through here, it's going to be the enter direction. And so nothing happens right now if the sphere goes through it. Nothing happens, but you see that it kind of has a little brightness flash, which means that it has been entered. But nothing's happening. What it is doing is running its script. So that's when you look at the trigger properties, if you right-click, you can hit Edit Code. I'm going to have to bring the window over. Is that over here?
There's no event yet. There's no code. So I'm clicking on event first.
Oh yeah, so yeah. Right. So on this trigger, under Events is where I need to make an enter event, and there's the exit, like I was just explaining. So I need to create an OnEnter event. So if I click this, here comes our script window. I pull it in from my other monitor, and I'll place it right here. So this is, now you can see this is a little lighter. That means we do have an OnEnter event in our script. We now have an object script here. And now if I close this, just like a couple days ago, we did this a lot, and I come over here and I hit Edit Code, or hit Edit Code, or Edit Code, or right down here, Edit Code. It's always going to bring us back to its object script, and on it is an OnEnter event. And so, like, just so you know that it's working, you can always do a simple thing. You'd make a print statement, print open close parenthesis, inside the open close parentheses, something that is a string, the type, just a bit of text, working, and we'll make sure we're working, and we are working. You see it print out here. Okay. What I'm actually going to teach you today is going to be, we're going to get to kind of do a fast track, because what we're going to do is use some of these we're going to use a pre-baked trigger interaction, not called interaction really, but you can kind of think of that, call it a trigger response. So we've baked some in here. So the first 3 under your trigger menu, triggers on the toolbox, the first 3 are the types of triggers you can have. You can have a plane, you can have a box, and you can have a sphere. Today we're using the plane, but again under triggers. The next ones are different ones you can mess around with. I recommend messing around with the booster, the bumper, and the object cloner. Those are going to be pretty cool. What we're going to be using today is the bumper. When you saw, the red sphere bounce off the red hoop, that's the bumper in action. And when I select it here with the left mouse and come over the trigger over here, left mouse, it fills our script. You saw it fill it here. It filled it with a script, a little inside the OnEnter function. And what it does here is basically it gets the rigid body of the object, and if there is one, this is kind of like yesterday, if there is a rigid body, then it can actually perform the rest of the script here. So the if statement, if it's true that it does have that body exists, that there is a rigid body on this object, then we're going to get its linear velocity. We're going to create a reflected linear velocity with a little bit of another function called reflect. Then we set the new linear velocity in this new reflection linear velocity direction. You don't actually have to know this or work with this today. We're going to basically build just the if statement that sorts, if this thing is red, do this, but if not, don't do this. And we're going to basically do that 3 different ways. We're going to sort by color, we're going to sort by the object's name, and then we're going to sort by the object's mass. So here we go. So okay, so I've got this trigger that that will bounce. So now let's just see ourselves. Let's see if it's working. It's definitely working. It works like a little sideways trampoline, and it's pretty awesome. So what we're going to do is build 3 of these, and then we're going to come in and change, put a little conditional statement, checking if the condition is met. That's going to be our if statement. And then we're going to check for the different things here. So in our first one, let's build out our balls first so that we know what we're testing for. So the first one, we're going to make this one just pure red, which we're going to use the RGBA values. And you'll want to remember these as we go into our script. But we're going to set it to 255, which is the maximum of red, 0 for green, 0 for blue, full alpha, so it's fully opaque, no HDR, so that's 255, 0, 0, 255. And so that's our first one. We're going to call this one red. We'll come up here. We'll come up to the red sphere's top level to its name. We'll call it red. Excuse me, red. And then we're going to clone it by holding down Alt and just sort of dragging another one off with the left click. And this one we're going to change to green. And we'll go ahead and make it 0, 255, 0, 255. I think this one we're going to actually test for the name green. So let's make sure we spell the name in a way that we remember. So in this case, we're going to do a capital G for capital G green. And now we're going to clone off green. And we'll make, by holding down Alt, and we're going to make blue. So blue we can make, we'll just, will be pure colors here, 0, 0, 255, 255. And we've got a pure blue one. And the thing that we're going to do different on the blue is we're going to make its rigid body, we're going to select its rigid body and make its mass. All these other ones are 0.05. We're going to make its mass 1 point something. And what we'll do is filter this out by seeing if its mass is above some amount. Now I'm going to make the 3 bumpers here. So this one, I'll go ahead and give this one a name because this, well, let's we'll do that just in a second here. Let's go holding down Alt, left click the mouse, and dragging along the ground. And so now we've got 3. And I'm going to close my script window. So I'm going to make the hoops just so we have a visual reference. And there might even be a faster way to do these hoops, but I'll have to get to it from this position. But the way that I like to do these hoops is under Entities, and I'm going to use a tube, and I will draw out some radius that I think is kind of roughly the size of that trigger, a smaller radius, and then clicking and pulling up to get a hoop. The other thing I'm going to do with this hoop, so that it, when I press play, so that it kind of stays in space and I can kind of affix it at a particular angle, is I'm going to make its rigid body not movable. And so now when I press play, it stays there, and I can move it and rotate it, and while we're in playtime, it doesn't fall, but these things can move around. Okay, so I've got this one ready to clone, this hoop, and I'm gonna make 3 of these, holding down Alt to drag away. So let's get a red one, and it doesn't really matter what color this is. I'm not being as precise because this is just more a visual indicator. Red, let's do green, and then let's do blue. Color, blue, cool. And they all kind of can stay rotated in space and everything. Great. So now I just want to get the triggers to ride along on top of these. So I'm going to bring the trigger over it, and this is going to take a little bit of finesse. These things are all 90 degrees off from one another, so I'm just going to rotate these guys into position, and then I'm going to probably change their shape. That looks too wide. So if I click on the trigger and come to its shape, I can go to dimensions and bring in this until I kind of square the circle. Alright, so then that looks good. That'll be in the right position. And then I want to take this bumper, and I'm going to place it under, well, let's actually give these names, these tubes. We'll call this, excuse me, red ring, green ring, blue ring, and then the red ring is where I want this trigger to ride along with my red ring, so that means it needs to be a child, which means that it's underneath on the hierarchy. So we go bumper, this bumper to red ring, and we can even name that bumper, call it red bumper. We'll name the other bumper, this will be green bumper, and this will be blue bumper. And I'll place the blue bumper on the blue ring, the green bumper on the green ring. Now I just need to bring these into position. So green bumper, what I can do is just come up to green bumper, come up to its transform, and like I said, double click, and that'll bring it to center, and it centers along on its parent, and I've rotated it. Now you see that it's now flattened out, the rotation and the position. Now I just need to get its shape kind of figured out. There you go. And we'll do the last with the blue bumper. Again, transform, double clicking here on this scroll wheel, and we'll center it and adjust its rotation the way I want. Plane shape, I'm bringing it in and bringing it in. The last thing that I have to do, and it'll make sense, you might encounter an error, this is very important, is I just need to make sure that this thing which is holding the bumper, I need to make sure that it doesn't accidentally activate the trigger. And so this is what this object, this little attribute right here, says whether or not I'm going to activate triggers, and so I can actually just come over here and remove that. So I've removed it for the red ring. I need to remove it for all the rings, so the green ring, and remove it for the blue ring. So now I've got these cool like bumper objects that I can now kind of place in space and have them stay there. Beautiful. And then what we're going to do at the end is we're going to make kind of those cylinder handles that we can aim these things as they get emitted, and we'll make everything grabbable with using interaction grabbable, but we're not going to do that just yet. Right now, we're going to dive into the if statements that help us filter. So let's filter for red. So what we're going to do under red is we're going to filter by the color, and then with green we're going to filter by the name of the object, and then with blue we're going to filter by its mass. So the way that that's going to work is red bumper. If I right click to edit its code, the red bumper is going to, it's only going to bump if, it's only going to bump if, get out of all caps, lowercase, come on, sorry, if you start off with if, and the next statement here would be the red object dot color. So I need to test the object coming through the trigger. Well, this object, the enter function, gives me this nice little thing called obj, which is the object that is passed through, so the trigger. So I need to test the object's color. So in this case, it's obj dot color. 2 lessons ago, you learned a little bit about setting color. If the obj dot color equals, so if the color of this thing comes through is equal to red, which was RGBA, which is RGBA 255 0 0 255, 255 red, 0 the other ones, and 255 alpha. So I'm going to show you something that I'm doing wrong, but I'm going to do the one more right thing here. So you create an if statement, and it's going to end up looking like this. If that is the case, then do this, and then end. End is going to go, it's going to do all this, and then we're going to hit end here. So let me just organize that. And I'm going to select all this and tab it in. So it's yelling at me. It expects a equals mark. And what does it mean? Well, here's where I've gone wrong. Whenever you're writing an if statement, this is how you test, right? So we did this yesterday, testing if a rigid body exists. Equals, when you're testing a condition, needs to be equals equals, because we're not setting object.color equal to this, we're testing if it equals. So you can think of the equals equals of as the conditional test equals. Does it equal? If object.color, does it equal RGBA 255? Then do all of this and end. And so if the object.color does not equal this, we're not doing this. Cool. So that means if it's green and it's 0, 255, 0, then we will escape out of this piece of function and come down to here, which says the next thing we do is just end this enter function entirely. So the way that this should work is if these objects come through it, we'll test the red one. The red one bounces, green one goes through, blue one goes through. So we've succeeded. So let's take one more look at that. Under the red ring, you have the red bumper. We're going to right click and hit edit code. So this is what we started with in our bumper code, because we're going to look at that one on green. We basically created an if statement, which has the condition to be met with our really important conditional question double equals, and test if the color is in fact this. Then we hit have then it's the bumper function and end. So your function's always going to have if, then, end, and we'll see a little bit later that it can also have an else and an if else. So let's move on to the green. So we're testing, in this case, color. So in the green, we're going to test the name. So I'm going to come over to the green in our hierarchy, the green bumper, and I'm going to right-click to edit code. And here I have just the raw bumper code. There is no test. So actually, anything that comes through here, you see the red goes away, but the green will bump. But just so does, oh, come on now. Let me get this into position here. Blue will also bump. So blue is bumping off of it as well. So let's just make it so that it bumps only green. So again, green bumper here, hitting edit code. Just for my own ease, I know that I'm gonna bury this under, I'm gonna move this one line under the if statement, or one tab under the if statement. So I'm just gonna start by tabbing it for looks sake. Tabs are not critical, like where these things line up is not critical in Lua, but it makes it much easier to know if you have the right, if you've kind of written it correctly, and kind of where the different chunks of your code are. So for green, we're gonna do if, and now we're gonna get the name of the object. So again, obj. So obj, and the way that you get at its name is a slightly different function. It's not object dot name. You have to get its name. It's a slightly different way of accessing. It's similar to object get rigid body. So object get name, it's a function. So it's not going to be dot, it's going to be a function. So it's going to be a colon get name, and that is a function. So it's lowercase first letter, no space, uppercase second or any words after that. So it's obj colon get name, and that's going to get the name of whatever passes through the trigger, and that's going to return this string, this text string. So if the green goes through it, it'll send back capital GREEN, and if blue comes through it, I still called green copy because I forgot to change its name. Make sure that it says blue. So if blue comes through this trigger and it goes and makes itself obj, when that function runs, obj colon get name is going to return. It's going to return something like this. In fact, I'm going to show you just for fun. I'm going to make a print statement up here just so you can see it happen. Print obj colon get name. And you're going to see it print green or blue. And so let's continue our if statement here. If obj colon get name equals, this time we're going to do it correctly to begin with, it automatically makes me an end statement, which I'm going to have to move. You saw that? So when I hit equals, and I hit enter, Simmetri automatically made me an end, because it knows that it needs to enclose the if statement. So if I hit end, just know that that's going to happen. If you go to a new line, you'll have to move that end statement out of here. Okay, so the name, if it's green, if it equals, and we have to put it in quotes, can't just be like this. That's the variable called green, which doesn't even exist. We've never even called anything green at this point. It needs to be this actual string of data, which will be in quotes, and you know it's a string. In this scripting window, it'll make it blue, and you've put it in quotes. This function returns a string, and so it'll compare a string to a string. So if the obj get name equals green, then do my bounce things, and we need end to come down here. Make sure if you hit enter here without this end, it'll throw that end up there. And you can cut it and paste it, or you can bring it down here, but it should look like this. I sometimes make some space so you can see this if is ended by this end. And again, our structure of our if statement is if, a conditional test, a then word, and then the thing to do, which coincidentally has another if statement in it, which is also structured like if. And this is the way of saying if there is such a thing as body, which means if the body exists. This is a sort of simplified conditional statement. So if conditional statement, then it does all this and ends. Then it comes back out here and ends, and then comes back out here and ends. So let's test for green. If the object name is green, and we're going to go ahead and print the name. If we throw the red one through, it doesn't even get to green. If we throw the green one through, it prints green, and indeed it does what we said it would do. Let's try the, oops, silly me. I'm just terrible at this game. Okay, so it passed through. It printed blue and it passed through. So it's working. All right, so this one tested for the names. The last one should happen pretty quickly here now that we kind of know our way around this if statement construction. And in this case, we're going to test for this one's mass, which if you remember, I set to 1.5 and oh, what's this one's mass? Oh, that's friction is 1.5, but its mass is 0.05, 1. So if the mass is if the object's rigid body mass is greater than 1, let's bounce it off the blue one. So here we go. Let's bounce off a blue here. So the blue ring, the blue bumper underneath it, right-click, edit code. You should be a pro at this by now. We're going to select all this and tab it in. We're going to say if, and now we need to get the rigid body. We learned this. We've learned this now, I think, 3 times. For doing physical things, it is pretty much the starting point. So it's lowercase g. So it's the object colon, lowercase g, get, uppercase rigid, uppercase body, open close parenthesis. That returns the rigid body of the object, right? And it returns, well, if it returns this thing, and then from this thing I can go down and get the mass. So obj.rigidbody.mass, if the rigid body's dot mass is greater than, well, this case we can just do the is greater than sign, pointed to the left. If that is greater than some value, we can just write a number. We don't have to write, this isn't a double is greater than in this case. It's only when it's equals where it's a double equals. There's also a not equals, which is the tilde equals, but this is just a greater than sign, which means, oops, I've cheated myself. You guys probably caught that. Look at me. Local body. I put this mass on the wrong place. Ha. Silly me. If object get rigid body dot mass is greater than 1, then I'll hit enter and it'll give me this end sign. Do all of this and then end. My mistake was seeing this object get rigid body and thinking it was this line. So if the object get rigid body dot mass is greater than 1, then do all this. So which means that blue will pass the test. It'll pass the red test and the green test. Oh, come here. There we go. Got it. That aim is a challenge, but I nailed it. All right, so the blue one, and you could do these now in any order. we should have a fully functioning sorting system here. In fact, I'll kind of aim these off in different directions a little bit. The next thing we're going to do is going to make this a lot easier. There we go. We're going to put these into emitters. So we've got our sorters, and that's pretty much the primary thing to do. So let's actually make this a world that we can kind of play around in VR. So the first thing we're going to do is use these as the samples for a bunch of emitters. Let's we'll kind of put some space in here. Okay, so the primary thing is we need to make these 3 rings grabbable. Then we need to create basically little cannons for each of these. Let's start with the cannons. So I'm just going to draw cylinders real quick. I'm going to make the cylinder. I'm going to make its rigid body fixed, and then I'm going to make 3 copies. I'm going to make this one red. I'm going to make this one, oops, cast shadows. We'll let it keep casting shadows. Make this one green. Let's do it. Let's make this one blue. Let's do it. Alright. And now I'm going to put an emitter on each of these. It's a node emitter, so we're going to put one kind of on the center there, one on the green, one on the red. And now I'm going to, just like we did with the triggers, child the node emitter to its corresponding parent. So this is the node emitter on blue, and watch as I scroll over in the screen itself. In the world, you see it kind of moving between. You see that pink selection move between the objects. I can actually use that as a fast way to know which one's the right one. Again, grabbing node emitter. You can see that I'm on the one with green, and if I scroll over that, I'm on red cylinder, I'm on green cylinder. Perfect. And again, this one to that one. And so now when I move these around, they will move what's emitted. So now I just need to like tell it what to emit. I want the blue to emit the blue. I want the green to emit the green, and red to emit the red. So let's do that. So what you do is on your node emitter, this is the red one. I'm going to basically come to its properties, and it has this thing at the bottom called sample, and I can now pick something in the world with this button here. When I scroll over it, scroll over sample, excuse me, and I hit pick. When I pick it, I can choose something from the space now. I'm going to pick the red one, and now when I press play, I'm emitting, the red one's emitting red ones. Perfect. Let's finish that out. So the green one, I'm going to come up to green, the green node emitter properties, and I'm going to hit, I'm going to come over to pick. I'm going to pick the green one. And now when I come over to node emitter, the last node emitter, this is the blue one, I want to pick the blue one. That looks about right. And now I want to make them all a little bit faster, so I can actually hold down Control and select all my node emitters, and I can come up to the continuous property and select this thing that says multiple objects under the pulse, and I can drive up the frequency. This is the amount of objects emitted per second. So I'll have like 4 of them emitted per second. Okay, so the last thing I do to make this fun to tinker with in VR is make each of these things movable, grabbable rather, and make each of these grabbable, and then I'll enter it with VR. So to do that, you go to Interactions, and this is the fast way of making something grabbable. I'm going to use Grabbable Fixed, and I'm going to just select Grabbable Fixed, and now I can select each of these items in a row, and it endows it with a special little note of script that says when you get lasered on, here's how you respond. And I already have a VR rig in the space, but if you're to be following this, you would go to VR, and I use the preset, and I might place it so that it's kind of like properly positioned. And now everything should technically work.
Now we'll do a monoscopic output.
Yeah. So, I'm told by my technician in the booth that when I do the VR, I might want to do a monoscopic output. This is stereoscopic, meaning one-scopic, two-scopic, red-scopic, blue-scopic. So I'm going to do stereoscopic. The way to do that is you basically have two viewports here. Once you've placed your VR rig into this place, you have this HMD camera viewport, which is that viewport is connected to a display, which is your HMD camera display. And what you're going to do is come up to your preferences. So if you were creating a show for somebody and you wanted to show them what your view looks like, you don't want to do left eye, right eye, and you want to do one thing. This is how you would do it. So you just need to come up to your up to edit, come to preferences, and in preferences down here you have the things that you're gonna the different things you're gonna work on. This tab called Outputs gives you the HMD camera display. The master display is kind of the main editor view, and then the HMD camera display is what we're gonna work with. And we're gonna create a new display output, and we're gonna render it as a screen. As opposed to stereoscopic VR. Right now it's automatically rendering stereoscopic VR to your VR headset. So you just want to create one that's screen. Do we want to go reduced?
Sure.
Yeah, reduced will be this will be fine. Reduced with an auto resolution, and then all you need to do is hit add, and you're going to do new screen display output. And I'm going to want to put this one on the left. Right? Okay, so the left, correct? So this display, the default display will be on our left monitor. This one has a right monitor set up. So this will be the left monitor, which is kind of cool because you could have a camera, a third-person camera looking at your VR scene. If you want to, put that on the left monitor and on the right monitor, like what's the first-person view, you can set that all up using this system. You will ask a lot of your GPU as you make it do more views. So we're going to do left, and that's going to be a screen display output for our HMD camera rendering as screen, not as stereoscopic VR. And now we're going to hit OK, which means that while in VR mode, as we do VR output, we're getting monoscopic, and as I put the headset on, you get the associated view. Okay, so I'm using the preset rig, so I'm flying using my left index. These are coming out. And I'm using my grip trigger to grab and rotate these things. It's a little bit chaos here. I'm going to get them set up kind of in the same direction. And then start filtering them. And then here. So one of the things I really enjoy is kind of just quickly setting things up like this, and then asking myself, like, how could I turn something like this into a game? And I don't have any miraculous ideas right at this moment, but you certainly can imagine that if I didn't have control over where these were positioned, I might find, and if I had different end goals to where these spheres had to get, it may create kind of a really interesting immersive puzzle game where I have to kind of figure out where to be. You could do the kind of the equivalent of like immersive billiards kind of deal, or pinball. And you could also do a thing where you could also make... Ooh, I did a magic trick. I got the rings to... That's one of my favorite little moves. That's the classic magic trick. Why don't I get all of them in there? Now, so another thing that I'm thinking of is that, and we could actually kind of set this up, but oh yeah, you'll notice it only works on enter. This is enter. Here's green on enter, green on exit, because I flip it over. You'll see red is actually just hitting the rim of this green object, green filter. You could also set something up where, imagine that when it comes through the green, and it's red, it gets tampered with. It's told that it's now passed through green, so that when it comes to, another filter, another trigger, it might say, "Have you passed through green?" And if the answer is yes, it may do something, which would be an interesting way to set this thing up. Why don't we do something like that and an active button. So the conditional test, here, this one's, what is it? Is it green? Name. Is the color itself, is the color property itself actually red? 255.0.0.255. And this one was, what's the mass? And is the mass how we want it? Is the mass greater than 1? So now I want to do something where we're going to turn, let's do this, where we turn green on. So green isn't going to work until we press some active button down here. And so, well, we can do this. So if you like where you've placed them in VR, if we like the positions we created and we want to keep them there, the way that we moved them around, just hit escape once and you'll be in pause time. You can come back, you can now select between the HMD viewport, which is your headset viewport, come back to terrain space like your editor, and the green is still surrounding the edge of your user interface, and that means that you're in pause time. And so you can kind of select items that you want to leave in space where they're currently positioned. That's called committing transforms. We probably are going to teach you that every single time. Control T. And so if I select and Control select each of my rings and each of these cylinder cannons, and then hit Control T, you'll see that it commits these transform changes, which means that when I hit stop, they'll stay put. And when I press play and look up again, everything will be where they are. Okay, so what we want to do is now make green not work, make the green bouncer not work until we press some button. So let's make our button. It doesn't really matter. It could be anything. I'll go again with rounded cylinder. Make a big juicy button here. Actually, let's do it kind of like Simmetri. So we need to create an on-press event for this, and so what that means is this is just like we've been doing. We did at least 2 days ago. We're going to create the interactiveness by coming up to its top level, coming to this little triangle and adding interactability, selecting that node, creating an on-press event, so that when we laser over it and interact with it or press the mouse, it will run this script. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a state on this button that says I am either on or off. And to do that, this is a key lesson in scripting in general, and very useful in Simmetri, is what's called a member variable. It's it's a member of this object here, this rounded cylinder entity, and it's going to be a variable that lives outside of your functions, and it's going to live at the top here. And you have to basically declare that variable by copying this, what you see here. You need to basically replicate that word. So in this case, it's uppercase M for mesh, uppercase E entity, and now I can say dot, and now I'm whatever I want my variable to be called. So in this case, I'm going to say mesh entity dot, I won't use active, dot ready. And then I'm going to say that this is a Boolean type. So this is true or false. Basically, true or false, 0 or 1. So I'm going to say that it is not ready until it's pressed, which means that when this thing starts off in the world, it's not going to be ready. So its readiness is going to be false. And if I asked for this object.ready, it would say, oh, I'm false. And then when I press it, I'm going to change this to be ready. So this is the basis of kind of a button and a state button that'll tell you what state it's in. So this is this mesh entity ready true? Not yet until we press it. So on the onPress event, we're going to say, and in this case, when we're here, we're going to use the word self, which refers to the object. And when I say self.ready, I just am now going to change this thing. So up above, you have to use this word, and inside of a function, you're going to use the word self. Self.ready equals true. It's that simple. So when it's pressed, it will switch from false to true, and I can create. We could create a print statement, but let's do one more thing. When this thing gets pressed, let's change its color so that we know, just like this, just like our own button here. Well, we're jumping into the HMD viewport, but anyway, when our play button gets pressed, it turns green. So let's do that for this guy. So when it's pressed, it is going to set itself to true, its ready state to true, and then it's going to change its color to green. So that means self.color needs to equal RGBA, and green was, so it's red, green, blue, so it's going to be 0 to 55, or some amount of green, 0, and then 255. And now we certainly will know if it works, because when we press play and we click it, oh, it's not active for this viewport. We'll do it in VR. Oh, I need to exit VR mode. Let me exit VR mode to demonstrate this. Is that what? No. I need a laser on it from this. Hold on. We'll do it in VR. Yeah. There we go. So now we've got it showing that it's ready in green. And now all I need to do is make a test on the green to ask, is this thing ready? It's going to go and listen to this button. It's going to say, hey, I'm not going to do anything unless this thing's ready. So how do we do that? Well, on the green rings, on the green ring bumper code, we're going to right click to edit code. We're going to connect these two together. So we've got this whole thing, which is tests if it's green and then does the bumperness. But if we take all of this, just like we did last time, and bring it in and only do this if this object is dot ready equals true, then we can. It's only going to work if this thing is set to true. So let's do that now. So we're going to say we need to actually get a hold of this first. We need to access this object. So to access it in our trigger script, we need to select it and drag that object in. So we've got this rounded cylinder entity. I can select it all. Control C, Control V. Well, actually, I'm gonna test a property of this. Yeah. So first we declare it, and now we've accessed it. So now I'm gonna say if the rounded cylinder entity 2 dot, and what was it again? Lowercase ready. If the ready equals true, then we're going to do all of this. So, oops, I wrote then. It needs to be end. So it not only, on the green one, not only does this need to be ready, the thing going through it also needs to be green before it does anything to this, the object going through it to make it bounce. Which means that when we press play here, we should see nothing happening on the green. Indeed, it's going straight through. Get my controllers. The green is going straight through until I press it. And as soon as I made this, we now are ready. So it's that simple. You can set up buttons that make things active or not active. So that's interesting. In this case, it waited until this object became, it waited till the button was pressed. You could do it differently, where, for example, I could say that the blue one is going to wait until the red one, until 20 red ones have passed. And we can demonstrate that, and I think after that I'm going to end this lesson on if this, then that. So let's check this one out. This one will leave you with a whole bunch of fun things to do, because now our bumpers will have they'll keep count of how many have come through them, and then they'll communicate that to other ones. So you could set up an entire long world of kind of dynamically activated objects. So the blue one is going to wait until the red one gets to a certain count. So what does that mean? Well, just like the green one was waiting until this thing dot ready turned to true, the blue one is going to go ask if the red one's count has reached a certain amount. So let's see, how can we make a count? How can we count how many objects have come through the red one? And let's say specifically red ones. So when the red one has bounced off 20, or we'll make it 10, after the red one bounces 20 red ones, then the blue one will start bouncing blue ones. So what we need to do is first keep a little counter in the red. So let's do that. Let's go to Edit Code on the red bumper, and we need to keep a counter that's not changing inside this function. So we're going to do the same thing with a member variable, and we're going to call it count. So we need to match this word. In the last case, it was mesh entity on our green ready button. In this case, it says trigger. So trigger in this context is referring to the trigger object here that's itself, the red bumper. So trigger, capital T, and we're going to say count. And of course, when we begin the process, it's bounced 0. And so all we need to do is figure out when it does do a bounce. That's when we just add one more to self.count. Just like in heat on the green one, we changed self.ready. In this case, we're going to change self.count. So let's do that, which means that it needs to not just count those that come through that are any color, because those will all come through as objects. They'll all come through as OBJ. We need to only add something inside of this moment when the color is in fact red. So we could do it here. we could do it here. Technically, if it does actually physically bounce it, we have to do it in here because it's only testing if it has a rigid body. In this case, everything that we're doing is always all these things that are bouncing through it have a rigid body. So anywhere inside of here, from this if to this end, but not here or here, basically from the function to end, but it has to be between this and this. So let's write it in here. So we need to say self.count equals, well, it's not going to equal a particular thing. It needs to equal something. It needs to equal this one more than what it was when it came in. So when the first one comes in, it's 1, and then it needs to be 1 more than that when the second one comes in. So what we end up doing is saying self.count equals self.count plus 1. So it's going to add 1 up here. Then if another one comes through, it gets all the way down here. It's going to say, oh, I'm already 1. So it's going to say self.count is equal to 1 plus 1. Then it's going to make this 2. Then it comes back through. And if it's another red 1, it'll make it 3, and so on. Perfect. So there we go. Now we have a counter that's going to count up. And let's go ahead and print count. And we've got a few things printing right now. So we're going to say print self.count. That's probably going to throw an error. And I'm going to make it throw an error at you, and then I'm going to show you why this is wrong. Know that this is wrong, and then oh, actually, I don't think it is wrong. It's not wrong. This is just fine. My mistake. So yeah, print self.count. That'll work. Oftentimes, you're going to need to put toString, and this will probably work too. ToString, you have to make it a string so that it'll it likes to print strings or numbers, but it wants everything to kind of be in a string. So let's play that and see what we get. And you can see these numbers printing here. They're printing. And so we quickly start adding up. So it's working. So we're printing. We no longer need to print, and so I can comment this out with 2 hyphens. Now when I press play, it'll no longer be printing those numbers. But you can see that if I want it to keep printing, I can delete those and select a different line, and here they come back again. So I'm gonna comment those out. So we now have this thing counting. So this red trigger has a .count member variable. So I just need to get from the blue trigger, I need to get a hold of this trigger and ask, is your count 20 yet? Alright, so how do we do that? Well, we need to go in to edit the blue, and then we need to access the red and ask if the red's .count is 20. So let's do that now. We're going to close this script window. Under our blue ring, we have our blue bumper. We're going to right-click the blue bumper. We're going to edit code. And in this code, the blue one is testing for mass. But we want to test first. We don't want to do any of this until the red object's count property gets to something. So we're actually going to tab this in because we're going to build another if statement around it. And I'll tab in one, and I'm going to say, I first need to access the red trigger. So just like any other object, a trigger can be carried into script. So I'll just pull it in from the hierarchy. I'll just go, hey red bumper, come on in. And we're in, hey red bumper. Then I'm going to say, if red bumper, and this is the key, the dot. Oops, we made our end statement. We'll move that later. If red bumper dot count is, well, let's say greater. If it's greater than 20, is greater than 20, then get rid of this. and we're going to delete that, and then we're going to do, which means that we're going to do all of this. You just need to put an end statement here. So if this, then all of this stuff end here. So until that count is greater than 20, it's not even going to run this. It's not even going to test if it's blue or if it's mass or anything. So just like the green won't run until we click green is ready, the blue won't bounce until red has bounced 20 red ones. Okay, we'll see if this works. I'm gonna put it in. Oops, I'm gonna put it in VR, and we're gonna watch the red one. So it looks like it's bouncing, bouncing, bouncing. Blue's still going through. It's still going through. It's still going through, and we've hit 20. So there you go. Let's do that one more time. We're still going through. Boom. So you could build a whole kind of like complex like system with that kind of, you know, logic built in. We'll leave you with that. I'll do one more thing for you that's that'll be useful. We're gonna make a little bit of a we're just gonna make a little piece of text, and on this text you'll be able to see this in the world. We're going to put the count of the red. I'm going to make this thing a little brighter, so I'm going to grab it and crank up the HDR so it kind of glows. And on this text shape, when the red one bounces, I'm going to change this to that count. Remember when we were printing its count? So I'm going to say red bumper. We're going to right click and hit edit code. And oops, there. And right down here where we were printing, I'm going to change this text shape's text property. Let me show you where this is. So the text shape, I'm just going to drag it in here, and we've just increased our count, right? So the count, this thing, the red one bounced and all this stuff happened, and then increases the count. Self count equals self count plus 1. Text entity, it's going to get its mesh model. It's going to get its shape dot text. So this is a bit of a mouthful. Text entity, lowercase g, mesh model, open close parentheses. So that's the function that returns the mesh model. And now this generic function to get the next thing, which is its shape, open close parentheses. And you can use this same function for any of these entities, any of these primitive entities or the box or whatever. And so under text shape, I've got dot text, and that's going to take me to the text entity's text shape, and it's dot text, which is the equivalent of this. Right? So whatever I type in here, let's leave it as text entity. Sorry, just leave it there for now. Whatever I tell this thing to equal in the script, text entity, get mesh model, get shape, dot text equals whatever I send this. It needs to be a string, so it needs to be like foobar or whatever. If I press play, it's gonna print. Or is it gonna change it to foobar? Yeah, it changed it to foobar. Sorry, there you see it up here. Bounces. It changes it to foobar. So I want to change it to self.count, and so what I'm going to do is do equals, and we'll see this probably won't. We're going to do toString, which will convert the number of self.count into a string. So we're going to do self.count, and that will should have it counting up. There we go, and we can see it counting up right here. But I don't want it to say text enti in the beginning, so I'm going to change this to 0. I'll say like no red bounce yet or something silly. And then we'll do self.count. So text entity is this object, and then it gets its mesh model, it gets its shape, it goes to its .text, and it says, hey, make that a stringified version of my .count, this number up here, that gets added to each time the red bounces. Cool. So that is kind of a way you could visualize your score in some sort of like a throwing game of some sort. But also, you notice that you're doing something. You're going and listening in on what my count amount is over here. So lots of different ways you can connect all these things, and we'll just sort of check this out in VR and leave you with that. And then I'm going to the last thing I'm going to show you is a few little symmetry properties. Let's fly around this in VR, and then we'll show you a few cool features and call it a lesson. Haha. Oh, I got there in time. Oh, that was the wrong one. Boom. Very cool. Okay, so that concludes the lesson of if this, then this, bouncing sorters. And what I wanted to show you is a couple of things that are pretty cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throw this whole world up on Steam so that you can download it, and you'll watch me as I do that. Any show that you create, you can share with all the other Simmetri users using the file share on Steam. And the way that this is going to work is you're going to get this little menu down here. You're going to choose, what maybe fits this best. I'm going to say that this is a sandbox. It's not particularly that artistic, but I'll call it an educational sandbox. Maybe it's a game. Not quite yet. I'm going to set it to public so that you all can see it, and then I'm going to change its export settings. Right now, it's going up under the title, if this, then that. I would have to type this in. I had already shared this over to this computer. So anyway, type in your title. You can type in an author name. If it's absolutely a VR experience, then you will click VR. I'm going to say unspecified at this moment. And then you can click edit title card, which gives you, this is the title, this is the information that people, when they see it on Steam, it's going to have this title and this author name. But you can put information in here, like basically, you might say, what it is, why, how to use it, maybe a call to action, like give me feedback, or oftentimes, like, I'll put in what I want to do next, because other people can subscribe to these, download them, and add them and remix them. And then lastly, for any place for you want Creative Commons attributions, they would go here. For example, a Google Poly attribution, or if you want to, name the artists or any contributors to your project, it's a great place to do it. I'm going to delete this and say that this is a lesson in conditional statements in script. The if statement. And there we go. Alright, so then what I'm going to hit is publish. And, whoa, that happened really fast. Good. And it's uploading the content to Steam right here. And when it concludes that, it'll pop up a window. And this is your Steam page. The other thing you'll notice is that it takes a screenshot. of wherever your camera was there in stop time. And so you might want to kind of set up a cool screenshot. You can always replace this later on. You can edit title and description, add and change the images here. And then other people are going to be able to subscribe to it. What I'll do at this point is click share, and I'll hit Control-C to copy that. And then I'll either send it to a Steam friend, like, this is actually me, I'm doing this from a different computer. I might send it to somebody like that. And in the Steam comments, you can see all that information, and you see kind of the title and description stuff here. The other thing is, yeah, you could share this, out fairly broadly. I'm going to show you our Discord interconnect as well in 1 second. But the other thing that you can do, just so you're always aware of this, is I can export this as an application, and this will spit out a .exe, a folder containing a .exe and all the assets, and it'll run in a standalone Simmetri player, which it's essentially just the app kind of lightly packaged down that just opens up and it'll run your experience. So this is the way you could package up a game and sell it out on itch. Right now we don't take any royalties or anything like that, so you're free to build and ship standalone experiences. Obviously, the tech requirements that are shown on Steam for you to build in the editor are going to be basically the same for anybody, and any end user of that your application. The editor is a little kind of heavier on compute power than is the player, so something to consider. So lastly, I wanted to show you again, obviously this is always the place to start, and we're helping you build up from here on these basic lessons under Learn Intro to Basics. We've got some physics, and there's more of these in the hopper, and we also are always interested in input on the kind of things you want to see more of. This how do I will pop you to the Steam forum, and right here, if you haven't done it already, you can click join the Simmetri Discord. It doesn't want you to do it during VR mode, so I'm going to click out of VR mode, and I'll hit learn, and I hit the Simmetri. What it did is it popped up my browser, and you'll see that it launched the Discord app. So I would continue to Discord, and this will land you at our page. Basically, it'll have you accept the invite if you haven't already, and then you will be arriving here. So we are actually in the Discord under 30 Days of Simmetri. I can paste in the Steam show, and that's the, what is this? This is day 4 tutorial show. Boom. All right. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. We will sign off from here, and we'll catch you tomorrow.